happens when a woman's mind is welcomed as a marvel, yet her ambitions are still judged according to the boundaries of her sex. On a June afternoon in 1678, an extraordinary gathering filled the Cathedral of Padua. Bishops, professors, Venetian senators, scholars, students, they'd all come to hear a 32-year-old woman speak about Aristotle. Her name was Elena Lucrezia Cornaro Piscopia. Before the afternoon was over, she would receive a laurel crown, a ring, an ermine cape, and a doctorate in philosophy. The ceremony made history. Elena became the first woman known to have received a university doctorate and the first woman to receive a doctorate in philosophy. Yet her story is more complicated than this single triumphant moment. It's a story of intellectual brilliance and spiritual devotion, of a father's ambition, an institution's resistance, and a woman trying to preserve an interior life while much of Europe regarded her as an extraordinary curiosity. Welcome to the Sunday Echo. My name is Cate Field, an artist. I'm a writer, teacher with a lifelong curiosity about the people and the places and the ideas that continue to speak to us across the centuries. And each Sunday, I follow one of these echoes and consider what it might still have to say to us. So today we are travelling to 17th century Italy, to Venice and Padua, and into the remarkable life of Elena Cornaro Piscopia. Padua. The city of Padua in midsummer carries a particular kind of stillness. Beneath those arcades, the heat settles into the terracotta tiles and the ancient stone. The great hall of the Palazzo della Ragione rises above the market squares, while the streets around the university lead towards the churches and the courtyards and the libraries. Time seems to accumulate here in layers. During the 17th century, Padua was part of the Venetian Republic, and it was home to one of Europe's oldest and most distinguished universities. Founded in 1222, the University of Padua had become an important centre for medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and the natural science. Galileo had taught there for 18 years and later described that period as the happiest of his life. Students and scholars travelled to Padua from across the whole of Europe, drawn by its reputation for intellectual freedom. Yet women remained largely outside the formal life of the university. A learned woman might be admired within a court or a convent or an aristocratic household. She might correspond with scholars or take part in one of Italy's learned academies. The university degree, however, belonged to an overwhelmingly male world. Elena's presence in the Padua Cathedral that June afternoon was therefore almost unimaginable. Elena was born in Venice on the 5th of June in 1646. She was the daughter of Giovanni Battista Cornaro and Zanetta Boni. Her father belonged to one of Venice's oldest noble families, and her mother was a woman of non-noble birth, and her parents were unmarried when Elena was born. Now, this placed Elena in an uncertain social position, shall we say. So despite the wealth and the influence of the Cornaro family, she was still considered a bit of an outsider. When Elena was 18, her father paid an enormous sum of money to have her and her brothers formally entered into the Venetian patriciate. And that same year, he was appointed procurator of St. Mark, one of the most prestigious offices in the Republic. Giovanni Battista recognised very early that his daughter possessed an unusual intelligence. He assembled a remarkable group of private tutors to educate her. And so Elena began studying Latin and Greek when she was about 7 years old. She later studied Hebrew, Spanish, French, Arabic, and possibly even Aramaic. Her ability with languages earned her the title Oraculum Septilingue, the seven-language oracle. She also studied mathematics, astronomy, geography, philosophy, and theology, and she read the works of the ancient philosophers and the Church Fathers. She entered a world of complex argument, precise language, and sustained contemplation. Elena was also a gifted musician. She played several instruments, including the harpsichord, the clavichord, the harp, and the violin, and it's believed that she also composed music. Music, mathematics, and philosophy were closely connected in the 17th century in that kind of thought. Harmony, number, proportion, and pattern all offered ways of contemplating the structure of creation. We can imagine that for Elena, a musical phrase and a philosophical argument were different ways of listening for the same coherence. Her education was exceptional, even among the daughters of wealthy families, and it was made possible by her father's resources and his influence, as well as by Elena's own extraordinary capacity for study. Yet, her father's support seems to have been both a gift and a burden. Giovanni Battista was very proud of his daughter's brilliance. He also understood that her achievements could restore distinction to a family whose prestige had suffered. Elena was encouraged to demonstrate her learning before scholars and distinguished visitors. Her intellect became part of the public identity of the whole Cornaro family. She wanted a life of study and religious devotion. Her father wanted the world to recognize what his amazing daughter could do. Much of her adult life was lived within that tension. Some early accounts suggest that Elena had resolved upon a religious life while still a child, although the details are a little uncertain. But what we do know is that in 1665, when she was 19, she became a Benedictine oblate. So an oblate lives according to the spiritual principles of the rule of St. Benedict while remaining within ordinary society. So Elena was therefore able to continue living with her family, pursuing her studies. So she belonged to the Benedictine tradition without entering the enclosed convent. The choice disappointed her parents, who had hoped that she would get married. And it also offered this compromise that her father could just about accept. Elena retained a measure of spiritual independence while her family didn't lose her completely to the closure of a monastery. The Benedictine pattern of prayer was study, discipline, and service, and this really does seem to have suited Elena's temperament. For her, intellectual work was closely connected with the life of faith. Knowledge offered a way of attending to the order and mystery of creation, and there's a beautiful seriousness in this understanding of study. Reading becomes an act of patience. A difficult passage requires humility as well as intelligence, and we return to this. When we return to something that we haven't quite understood, we allow the meaning to reveal itself gradually. For anyone engaged in creative work, this will probably sound familiar. A painting or a piece of music or a piece of writing often asks for that same kind of attention, doesn't it? We stay with something before we know exactly what it will become. Elena's life reminds us that close attention can be both intellectual and devotional. The mind and spirit meet in the willingness to remain present. By the 1670s, Elena's reputation had spread far beyond Venice. She became a member of several Italian academies and she corresponded with prominent scholars. Learned visitors came to meet her and hear her take part in philosophical discussions. Her knowledge of theology was considered sufficient for a doctoral degree. In 1677, her tutors supported an application to the University of Padua. Cardinal Gregorio Barbarigo, the Bishop of Padua, I will get his name right, and he was also the Chancellor of the university, he refused to allow this. Theology was the most prestigious of the university faculties, and a doctorate carried authority to teach and to speak publicly about matters of doctrine. And in the institutional understanding of the time, granting such authority to a woman was unacceptable. Elena's father protested, and a lengthy dispute followed. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Elena would be permitted to receive a doctorate in philosophy, which was really quite remarkable. It was a remarkable concession. And I just find this, at this time, really, really quite remarkable. So her father was able to kind of push this idea, because it also revealed the boundary that remained firmly in the place. Elena's ability was recognised, but the kind of authority that she could hold was still determined by her sex. So it was still quite complicated, but it was still really quite revolutionary. Elena's own feelings about this are quite difficult to recover. Much of what has been written about Elena was shaped by the ambitions of her family and the admiration of the men who observed her, but only a few fragments of her own voice survive. We know that she possessed intellectual capacity for the degree, and we know that her father pursued this with considerable determination. Elena herself seems to have been far less interested in public distinction. Elena's doctoral examination took place on the 25th of June, 1678. The audience was expected to be so large that the proceedings were moved from the University of Padua Cathedral. Professors, students, church officials, Venetian senators and guests from other Italian universities, they all assembled to witness the event. And Elena was given passages from Aristotle's Posterior, Analytics and Physics. Speaking in Latin for approximately an hour, she explained and discussed the texts before this whole assembled faculty. It's worth pausing to imagine the scene. A woman who'd conducted most of her studies privately in the rooms of her family home now stood at the intellectual centre of the university. Around her were men who spent their lives within institutions from which women were largely absent. She spoke with sufficient learning, clarity and composure to satisfy every academic requirement placed before her. At the conclusion of the examination, her professor, Carlo Rinaldini, conferred the insignia of the degree. A book represented the knowledge that she had acquired. A ring symbolised her union with philosophy. An ermine cape marked her academic dignity, and a laurel crown was placed upon her head. She was proclaimed Magistra et Doctris Philosophae, teacher and doctor of philosophy. The ceremony was a public spectacle, yet at its centre was something quiet and exacting. Years of reading, study, repetition, memory and thought. The laurel crown belonged to one afternoon. The work that earned it had taken place slowly, page by page. Elena's graduation was celebrated across the whole of Europe. Academies and poets praised her learning and scholars sought her correspondence. She was compared with Minerva, the classical goddess of wisdom. After her death, the University of Padua commissioned a medal in her honour. Yet Elena appears to have accepted public acclaim with some reserve. She continued to study, to pray, and to support those in need. And after receiving her degree, she moved to Padua and lived in Palazzo Cornaro near the Basilica of St. Anthony. Her health had never been strong. Years of intense study and severe ascetic discipline seemed to have placed further strain upon her. She suffered repeated periods of illness, and she died in Padua on 26th of July 1684, aged only 38. That anniversary fell just a week ago, July the 26th. She was buried in the church of Santa Justina, associated with the Benedictine community to which she had been spiritually connected. 4 years after her death, a collection of her surviving writings was published in Parma. It included academic discourses, translations, and devotional works. Much of what she wrote, unfortunately, has disappeared. One account suggests that she asked for some of her papers to be destroyed, although we can't really be certain of that particular story. There's something quite poignant about this loss. Elena was discussed, examined, admired, commemorated, but so little of her own voice remains available to us. History has preserved the ceremony more completely than it preserved her actual life, the actual woman. It would be comforting to imagine that Elena's doctorate opened the University of Italy to other women. It did not. Soon afterwards, another professor at Padua attempted to secure a degree for his own learned daughter, and the application was rejected. Accounts suggest that university officials feared that Elena's achievement would lead to further applications from women. Elena had demonstrated beyond doubt that a woman could meet the highest intellectual standards of the university. The institution responded by treating her as a rare exception. More than half a century passed before another Italian woman received a doctorate. In 1732, Laura Bassi was awarded a doctorate in philosophy by the University of Bologna. She went on to become a physicist and one of Europe's very first female university professors. Elena's laurel crown had illuminated a possibility, but it had not yet transformed the structures surrounding her. This is one of the more uncomfortable patterns in the history of women's achievement. A remarkable woman may be celebrated precisely because she is presented as exceptional. Admiration for the individual can coexist quite peacefully with the exclusion of everyone who might follow her. Elena herself does not appear to have regarded her life as a campaign for women's education, and it would be unfair to place modern ambitions into her story. Her priorities were shaped by her Catholic faith, her Benedictine vocation, and her desire for intellectual contemplation. Yet her achievement inevitably enlarged the idea of what a woman could do. Every page she studied, every argument she mastered, and every word of Latin that she spoke in that crowded cathedral made the old assumptions a little more difficult to sustain. Today, a statue of Elena stands at the University of Padua. It was donated in 1773 and now rests at the foot of the Cornaro staircase in the university's ancient courtyard. Her graduation is also depicted in a beautiful stained glass window at Vassar College in New York. Created in the early 20th century, it shows Elena surrounded by the professors and dignitaries of Padua, the laurel crown held above her head. Over time, the quiet Benedictine scholar has become a symbol of women's education and intellectual freedom. Perhaps she would have found such attention uncomfortable. She might have preferred to return to her books, her music, and the measured rhythm of prayer. But still, her story leaves us with a question that cannot be answered by the laurel crown alone. What does it mean to celebrate an exceptional woman while leaving the boundaries around other women undisturbed? Elena sought knowledge with patience and seriousness. She cultivated a life of mind that was also the life of the spirit. Her achievements grew from the sustained attention she gave to language, to music, philosophy, to faith and the intricate order of the world around her. And perhaps that is her echo. A door may open for only a moment. Someone still has to walk through it, and by doing so, leave behind the knowledge that it can be opened again. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of the Sunday Echo. If you enjoy discovering the lives and ideas that continue to resonate across the centuries, you are very welcome to subscribe to Quiet Wanderings and join me again. Take care. Bye-bye.